everybody, and welcome to the Universal Court of Truth. That's right, remember, She Hulk is a show about lawyers. Today, we are talking about episode 3, also known as The People versus Emil Blonsky. I am one part of this courtroom, Hunter, and this is
The other part, Mary.
the better part because she knows what to do in a courtroom. Real lawyer.
Really.
It's incredible. Um, as per usual, Mary, please give us your basic, general, all around feelings, thoughts, and vibes about She Hulk episode 3, which I will say, of the three that people have seen, is my favorite.
It's my favorite of the three that are out and of the four that the press critics, I don't know what we've gotten to see. I understand some people like four better, but I think we've talked about this after episode 2, like kind of the structure that the show wants to have, like gets to kick in, like we
Yeah.
know she's Shield, blah 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 blah, and we're kind of getting these like cases, and then you had a nice fourth wall break that explained like the A and the B storyline,
Yeah.
but and they were both very legal, so that whole legal comedy thing, we've got it. So I love this episode. I personally, just the humor is the reason it's my favorite. I really like, obviously, as like a character, he's pure slime, but like Dennis Bukowski as a
Oh
character,
yeah.
like if that
Yeah,
makes
no, he's a good comedic relief. Yeah.
He is, and he's like over the top, but it's just funny. And the actor, I think, does a great job just with some of his like line deliveries. Like I think in the courtroom when she was like, he has told me about his dating life like all the time and unprompted. He goes, "You wanted to know," and just like the way he can say things like that, I think I really enjoyed him, and I really like Pug. I think those two had good. I don't know if chemistry is the right word, but the humor between them and the B storyline, I really enjoyed that. Like that's been my favorite part of the show. I thought that was hilarious. And just in general, it's funny. It's light. It's kind of absurd by MCU standards. You got Wong just like showing up late to a parole board hearing, and like leaving when they like suggest that he's doing some weird stuff. So it's just the kind of like weird stuff you would love to see in like a normal movie's post credit scene, but you get like a full show of it. It kind of feels like. So I love this episode. It's my favorite. That's
Yeah, I especially really like what you just said about how it feels like what we would normally get from post credit scenes. It's like they took that and made a whole TV show out of it.
thank
I think
you.
that's true. I've never thought about it that way, but once you say that, like they did, they would often use those post credit scenes to be like, LOL, this is how random character you saw in like the side of this story for 3 seconds reacted to like something crazy happening, and now that's what all of this is. Also bringing up like the Wong thing, this show being like, there's obviously a reason that he shows up late to the parole. Like he's the sorcerer supreme. Whatever the heck he's doing is probably more important, but he like is a man of his word. So he comes in, he does his thing, and then he's gotta go. And I do really like how this show is not afraid to point out the comic bookiness of like, yeah, technically Wong broke the law by breaking a prisoner out of his cell forcibly, but it also like, what are they? They're not going to arrest the Sorcerer Supreme, so he just like dips out, and I like that the show can have that and be that level of fun. But yeah, like you said, the fourth wall breaks have been helping a lot. Like at the very beginning of this episode, there's that fourth wall break where Jen is like, I hope you guys aren't expecting this to be like a cameo every week kind of show, and then she starts to realize like, oh, it kind of is, but like let's remember that it's about me, and like I really like that as well, and I think that this episode continues to do a really good job of having weekly cameos, but also having it still be very much a TV show about She-Hulk and not like the cameo show, which is really good. And I also do think that this episode did a really good job of linking its A and B stories together, and also making sure that both the A and the B story were equally interesting and fun to watch, which isn't always the case. But I was really really glad to see that happen here. Um, yeah, so this episode is about, like you said, this is the first one to have like a real, I think, full court case of some kind happen in it, which is reflected in the title, which I think I was happy to see that that's literally the title of the episode. Um, we can get into it later, or we can get into it now, but I'm going to ask about your thoughts on the legal aspect of the case that happened.
The fact that they did not stand up when talking to the judge in, I guess, the B storyline during the motion to dismiss stage, which I appreciate. They did do a motion to dismiss stage, but then they just kind of generally had a hearing. First of all, nothing moves that quickly. Let's just put that out there. That should just seem to happen in the same day. No. But no, they sat there at their benches. You don't sit while you're addressing the court. That bothers me so much. I really don't like. I don't know. Every time I watch it, I just can't. I can't with that. And then like when Jin was on the stand later as a witness, obviously Pug got up and stood and talked to her. You don't talk to a judge from the. I've never seen that, and I highly doubt the county court in Los Angeles operates that way. But that really bothered, really did. Um, it just looked so wrong. It was so weird. I just no. I mean, so there's a couple angles. Obviously, we have the two different storylines. Those are very different types of things. When I worked for a court, that jurisdiction didn't do parole. It's kind of interesting, but they do a lot of probation. It's very similar kind of concepts. I've worked on things like that. And then, obviously, the B storyline was more, it was a civil case. Civil and criminal going on, so that's kind of cool. But, so do you have any specific questions, or else I might just start rambling, because now I'm thinking about all of it.
Well,
but they did not stand up appropriately.
Well, I'm glad that we talked about that, because that's just something that now that you say it makes sense, and I've seen other shows do, but I never for a second was like, I can't believe they're still sitting down.
Yeah, it's like unnatural, and it hurt. It hurt a little bit, because like that's a very like normal detail, and maybe they thought about it, but they liked the way it looked better and it worked better that way. I get that, but I'm just no.
Well, okay, so let's start with something that you just said. I feel like this is one of those things that people could kind of surmise, but it might be fun to have an actual breakdown. You said that one of the cases is like a criminal case and one is like a civil case. So does that just mean like a criminal case, I imagine, because like Emil Blonsky is a criminal and Jen was representing him in a case involving a crime? Or is it the other way around?
I got you. Here we go. So the title was People versus Emil Blonsky, right? So that would have been his original criminal case, presumably, which is kind of funny to think about how he, at some point, had a criminal case where he went to trial and then got put in jail for being the Abomination. Like
for destroying like half of Harlem.
I know. So that's what the criminal case would have been titled. So it's the same case. This is just kind of the parole, I guess, stage in it, which obviously whatever they sentenced him to at a minimum time. It's hard to say with the blip what exactly that was, and maybe they said a year. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But so it's the same case. It's that same criminal case. It's just we're at the end of it per se. And depending on your jurisdiction, how they do it, they had a parole board. That's pretty common. I feel like you hear that a lot in TV shows and stuff. But yeah, their job is to determine if someone is suitable for release. At that time, this is the MCU. Obviously, he did get released. Highly doubted. Like, I've like a monster person. Like when you get
Yeah,
that.
I was thinking that when I was watching it. I was like, only in a world where this is like an established recurring thing with this. Like, I don't imagine that he would ever have been released ever in the real world.
No.
Especially like the fact that they had, whether it was Wong who forced him to do it or not. I just imagine like the fact that he did leave prison at all would have been super hard to get past.
Yeah. I mean, and it would have been a lot more. I mean, again, Wong's an interesting character because people both seem to know who he is and not know who he is all at the same time. Like in Shang-Chi, they were like, that's Wong, you know? And then here they had to look him up on LinkedIn, but then he can come to legal things and people are like, yeah, we're going to listen to this guy. So it's an interesting thing there. But yeah, okay, weird detail I thought of. When he turns into the Abomination to like show he's in control, that jail cell he's in doesn't hold his size. Who would build
Yeah.
that? Who put in it? Like, I get, and that was her point. She's like, he clearly could have broken out at any time, but it's like, who custom built that for him and then didn't even make it tall enough?
This reminds me of going back to like Miss Marvel when they tried to put the clandestine in the same prison and it was like equally easy to escape from. Like
Well,
anyone going in there could have just left.
but that was, yeah, I thought it just seems that just seemed weird to me. But yeah, it's hard to imagine because they were like, okay, if he ever breaks the conditions, which was one of them, like never turning into the Abomination, like he immediately goes back to prison. It's like if he decides to turn into the Abomination, like you can't just casually drag him back to prison. If
That's
he's
what I'm
just
saying. Like, what are you gonna do? Handcuff him?
yeah,
Like, no.
it's like there's just obviously fictional universe where things like that are becoming more common. Fine, but realistically, it's hard to picture when you're weighing the fact of release versus not releasing somebody that turning into some amphibian kind of looking monster now guy.
Yeah.
It's hard, especially because what if that was 2008? Assuming he didn't flip, which I don't know why we would assume that, but let's assume that. What's that? It's like 2025-ish in that show. It's like 17 years.
Yeah. Because well, Bruce mentions in like the first episode that it took him like 15 years to
Yeah.
figure out how to control the Hulk. So
Yeah.
that yeah, like 17, 18 feels right.
So kind of a low minimum sentence, you'd think, for destroying Harlem, but another side, I guess. Yeah, but so that's fun. But yeah, that's why it's a criminal case because it's still his like original, like that's
Okay.
his relationship to the government at this point in time. Is he is criminal, and that was his whole.
Okay, so that's the difference. Is the other one's a civil case because neither of them are technically criminals yet.
Well, correct. So in a criminal case, the government is always the plaintiff. So again, depending on the jurisdiction, this one, I guess LA, it says people versus, so the people is like the public, which is the government. Other places, it's like the United States versus, or the state of whatever versus. So civil cases, you got two private parties. You had Bukowski and what was her name, Runa, something like that, the shape shifting elf. So
Yeah.
he was suing her for money.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be kind of, so that's a traditional civil thing is you're suing for damages, but you can sue for like injunctive relief, which is kind of what he hinted at towards the end, which is like telling someone to stop doing something essentially, or to actually perform a contract you entered into, they didn't do anything, things like that. But yeah, but so there was a lot going on with that one too, although it ended up being pretty simple. Although another side thing, so Bruna got 60 days in jail at the very end because she like impersonated the judge for a hot second.
Yeah.
I'm pretty damn sure you don't just get sentenced to jail like that. Like you're still
You know, I actually I'm gonna take some smart points for myself on this one because I also was gonna that was one of my follow-up questions was that
yeah.
it felt like the judge like was very fast to be like, all right, you're going to jail now, and I was like, oh wow, that was that was quick.
Judges have pretty good deal of authority with respect to like contempt of court, right? So they could definitely on their own say someone needs to go to jail for whatever. But you don't. It's not just like a gavel hit and it's done. Like there's just no process. It's not going to happen in the same hearing that the rest of the case is going on. And that's just
And
things that don't get meshed together like that. Things
right.
are more, and that's why everything's really slow. But
Is 60 days like does that make sense to you as a punishment for impersonating a judge, or does that seem like easy?
I have no idea.
I was wondering that. I was like, I don't actually know how severe. Obviously, I know you're not supposed to do it for obvious reasons, but
Her case would have been like worse than like if someone out in public was, to be fair, impersonating. I don't quite know the law on impersonating judges. So when that lawyer stood up and yelled it, I have no idea if that's actually like written law. I mean, obviously nobody should go up on a bench pretend to be a judge and like
yeah,
cases. That's where I think that was really.
it's one of those things that feels right.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. I'm not very familiar, honestly, with jail, like short-term sentences stuff. When I dealt with stuff that was
Yeah.
stuff. So I don't know. I mean, it's 2 months. And,
Yeah, I did. I like as I. None of this is a complaint about the episode because I do take into consideration and completely understand that it is an episode of television set in the Marvel universe, and therefore, you know, the standards are only so high for the reality of their law work. But yeah, that was something that I noticed on. I didn't even think about it the first time or two that I watched the episode, but eventually I was like, these cases are going by really quick, and it did feel like with Abomination, like they had a few people come in and say like, yeah, he was real good to me, and then they were just like, all right, we know you can change into this huge monster, and we have no trust in you. We had no trust in you an hour ago, but now like go out into the world, let's see what happens. That surprised me, but I did enjoy that case, and I did enjoy all the ways that Blonsky was. um yeah, I have no idea if he actually does consider himself reformed or if this is all some sort of ploy, but like, his seven soulmates and all of that, or it was a delight. I enjoyed watching
I
watching that.
I saw people theorize that when he mentioned his seven soulmates or pen pals or whatever it was last episode, that it was like the Thunderbolts. Like that was a setup for the Thunderbolts.
This doesn't feel like the kind of show that's gonna do anything like that. Like it's like, no, he's talking about seven
I
soulmates.
remember when I watched it, and hadn't watched, episode 3, and I was just going through them. I had the same thought, and then obviously I found pretty quickly I was wrong, but it was kind of sad knowing that people for like a week were maybe like waiting for that, and it was just
Yeah.
like Sheila in there, Nicolette, Yvonne.
Yeah,
We
I
had
don't remember all the names, but I
here, but like
I love the little detail of when he turned into Abomination to like like you mentioned, prove himself. Everyone was freaking out, but in the background, if you look at the soulmates, they're like fawning over him. They're like, "Oh my gosh!" I love that so much. It was such a nice little detail. I laughed so hard when I noticed.
I will say I do feel like kind of going back to what you said. I feel like She-Hulk could be a show that sets up a lot of things, but not very like aggressively, but like opens the
Yeah,
door. Like you get like the slightest like Thunderbolts tease, you get the slightest whatever Wong's doing tease, Wong the TV show, we don't know. And then like I could see it being a good vehicle to like honestly like introduce a lot of like what we know will be future concepts. But I agree. I mean, I don't think the Thunderbolts will be formed, right?
yeah,
But I could see a tease at some point. If for some like let's say a later episode or even like the very end, like we kind of get the twist of oh Emil was faking it or whatever. We kind of see him do some shit, and in the background he's got some friends. That's probably still too much, but I could see something like that.
well, and you make a good point there, in that this episode alone has a lot of bits of dialogue and opportunities to be setting things up. I mean, there's a lot of very casual references to like things that we know. I mean, there's a No Way Home reference from Wong, which I thought was funny. So we know this takes.
The question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Wong have forgotten Peter too?
That's a great question.
Because I know in No Way Home
We
they
know
like
that Strange forgets who Peter is because Strange like says goodbye.
Yeah, and I know in No Way Home like Wong made a joke, or maybe one of them made a joke, either him or Doctor Strange, about like making someone forget like a party or something. So I know it happened before, and I thought technically that's probably what he was referencing because as far as we know, like he has no reason to.
Yeah, I like that a lot better. That's kind of how I took it, was less like, yeah, we just had this crazy fight with Spider-Man and all that stuff, and more is like, I mean, we know, like you just said from the beginning of No Way Home, Wong is like, I know what spell you're talking about. I don't like that spell. We're not doing it. And so I do like the idea that this is like a recurring thing in his life where he's consistently having to convince people not to wipe everybody's memory, and like, and he's out there like, yeah, you have no idea how crazy it can get, and he doesn't even remember the fact that he just had to deal with like the multiverse breaking open and all of these like alternate people coming in. I think that makes it a lot funnier. But yeah, I think it would have been more confusing if Strange said it, because Wong seems to be the one who's like been consistently against it.
I think I mean it was to me like kind of a half fourth wall break, a second wall break, just because like it clearly was a joke at No Way Home or in reference to it, but like kind of also made sense in the situation. But like really, the purpose was kind of to like reference.
Well, because Jen's reaction is what makes it feel like it's almost like a dig at Peter, because Jen's like, why would I ever do that? Like, duh. and that is funny, of the two adults in the room being like, yeah, what the heck? Why would anyone ever try that? And then Steven and Peter are like, we're gonna screw with everything because we're both children. Yeah, so like there's a No Way Home reference. Runa has a quick little Ragnarok reference that they shut down really fast, which again, all this is funny because it's like these are all things that you don't have to think about, and maybe you're not supposed to, and you can just enjoy it. But if you really want to think about the implications it has, like in universe, it can get really funny and interesting really quickly. Because I was thinking about the Runa one even more so than the No Way Home one, and I was like, so this brings up a few options. Either Runa was there when Thor made that speech, or that speech is like now often recited and famous within New Asgard, which is funny because that means that Thor might have had something to do with like getting his own speech as part of New Asgard's legacy.
Well, she kind of would have, in theory, had to have been there in Ragnarok because they mentioned she had diplomatic immunity because she was like related to somebody on Asgard, and now New Asgard implying that.
Right, because she's not Asgardian per se, like she's a light elf, but if she has diplomatic immunity, then she might have been living in Asgard when it.
Yeah. That's
but now this raises the questions of like the politics of Asgard, and you're like, okay, so even before they got on Earth, they had like diplomats and ambassadors. So this is like a whole other question, like a whole other hole we can go down. But yeah, I thought that was funny, and also the fact that like the non-Asgardian person knew it was a Thor speech, which again makes me feel like someone. Yeah, someone on Earth was like, yeah, Thor gave this really dope speech once, and now everybody knows about it.
It's like the concept that everybody might know that in Endgame, Steve Rogers basically whispered Avengers Assemble before they all charged. Like that's to be a known fact.
But that, again, I do like that Miss Marvel introduced the concept that Scott Lang has a podcast, because I can picture Scott Lang being like, yeah, and then he screamed Avengers Assemble, and like he totally throws it up into the air and makes it like this big thing that it's not. But yeah, like that, and just the fact that Runa is a light elf, and like, you know, this is the type of show where you could introduce Asgardian creatures and species and characters that we haven't even seen in the Thor movies, but then you have them be in She-Hulk is like, oh yeah, they're living in New Asgard and now we've met like a troll for the first time or something like that, which and just set up little inklings for Thor 5 where they fight Ulik or whatever. So it is fully possible and fun and interesting. Runa, by the way, just while we're talking about her, mischievous little being, but also her name is not like Runa the Light Elf as a character. I don't think is like a comic book based character. There is a semi major character in like the Thor Valkyrie comics right now called Runa, who just is a Valkyrie. She's like the newest one of the new Valkyries post Brunhild and all that fun stuff. So there is a Runa in Thor comics, but it's like a wildly different character. Um, just in case anyone was wondering and hadn't looked into it yet, the name is there, but the character I don't think is. Also, while we're talking about Wong, I do like that his LinkedIn, one, he has a LinkedIn, which again, so many questions this raises. Two, I like that he's maintains and is still very proud of the fact that he was a librarian before he was the Sorcerer Supreme. I love that little detail about him because it's so perfectly in character. And he leaves it on his LinkedIn to be like, yeah, I'm both. I'm still a librarian at heart.
Yeah, and that's when people like talk to him, and they call him Mr. Wong, and he goes, just Wong,
Yeah.
Sorcerer Supreme, former librarian.
Like he needs his titles in there. It's just Mister isn't the title.
he, they have done such a fun job with him, and it started in Shang-Chi, really, because he just kind of showed up briefly, and obviously they did karaoke with him, so it's like, oh, Wong's fun. And then in this show, they're like, oh no, he really is. Like he can't. But
Yeah,
yet
he's
he's
just
also
chilling.
the Sorcerer Supreme. Like it kind of almost would have made more sense if he like wasn't, and it was Doctor Strange, and so Wong could kind of be like more or less like funny sidekick kind of, but he's the actual Sorcerer Supreme, and
No,
he's
he's just chilling with like
and it's
people.
yeah, and so and yeah, he finds time out of his day to go to parole board hearings and
Right,
or
and he's like clearly very busy, and who knows what the heck he was doing? Yeah, I mean, he was like out of breath when he showed up, so he's probably battling some interdimensional creature or whatnot. Um, but yeah, I do. It makes me wonder. I was just talking to a friend about this recently. Like the ancient one, right? She was the sorcerer supreme for however long, and who knows who the Sorcerer Supreme was before her. But before Doctor Strange, it doesn't seem like the public knew about the existence of of a Sorcerer Supreme or magic for that sake.
yeah.
So like you would have to assume that it's normal tradition that the Sorcerer Supreme kind of hides themselves away from humanity and protects them from interdimensional threats from the shadows. And then Wong comes along, and who knows? Maybe it's because the events of the years prior blew his cover and he didn't feel like he had to hide anymore. But he really is just like, he flashes his title around. He's showing up to like legal meetings saying, I'm the Sorcerer Supreme. What about it? Like, I feel like he has to be the first Sorcerer Supreme ever, aside from maybe one like millennia ago who would hang out with like tribes of people and that was their vibe. But yeah, and the fact that the so much is going on in that universe that some guy can show up and be like, "Yeah, I'm the magician," and everyone is like, "Yeah, all right," and they just go with it, like they just believe him.
I do think the concept probably is that after more or less in game, I mean,
Yeah,
it's an easy thing that people who are otherwise very incognito, and that's how they operated, did come out of the woodwork, and now that's now why everybody seems to know everything because we didn't get kind of hints of that really before. So I think that was probably part of it. Like, hey, half of everyone died for a while. Just so you know, like we're working on it.
super
Uh,
super sorry, but just so you're all aware, like you died. It's been 5 years. You came back, and I knew that you knew about the Avengers. But there's more gods than you thought there were. There's magic. and just like going down the list, and everyone's like, well, I was just dead for 5 years, so who's to say what is and isn't real at that point?
Man. Some people understood that stuff for 5 years, and then everyone else came back, and they had to start learning that shit. The learning curve there. That's funny. They should do something like that. They should have a lawsuit that involves the blip. That would actually be so easy to do. Like someone moved into my house, while I was existing. Just so many things like that. Or
it's actually a great idea.
And just pay for my job that I was salaried for while I didn't exist, even though I was still on payroll technically. Just like it could be good, but I don't think they like to talk about it much. But that would be kind of a fun, again, half fourth wall breaks. I think it would be really referencing the fact that we don't talk about the blip. The blip, there's a lot of plot holes with it.
Yeah, this is feels like the show to address it. Like, I know that one of the writers said a while back, we haven't seen it yet, and I don't think we've seen it in the 4 episodes that we've seen, but that it was gonna finally kind of address what's going on with the Sokovia Accords. And again, this is a good show to do that with, because they introduced them and they disappeared, but if you're gonna be having a group of people running a law division designed for superhumans, you would think the Sokovia Accords would come up at some point. So I'm glad they're addressing that, but who's to say? Maybe there is a blip related incident. But yeah, I feel like they're aware how many plot holes there are with the blip, so they're like, the less we really talk about it, the less questions we have to answer.
For sure. Great plot device for a movie, though, but long term,
long term, they're like, we really screwed ourselves with that
one. Yeah.
There's a few. Let's see. There's a few other. Right. This doesn't have to be a whole conversation, but I just want to throw it out there. The news reporter, or no, not news reporter. The guy who shows up on TV, I think he was another lawyer. He's like the one who put Blonsky away all those years ago. And he's like, I can't believe anyone would be working. Yeah, his name is Gideon Wilson. And in the comics, that is the name of Sam Wilson's brother. So it's very possible that we actually see Gideon again and that he shows up in Cap 4 or something as Sam's brother, who was wildly not present in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I know. That seems like it relatively, if they knew they were going to have him long term, to mention a brother,
Yeah.
But,
and it could be they just lifted the name for funsies, and he's not actually going to have anything to do with Sam. But it is interesting that they would select it. Gideon is not a common enough name for me to feel like.
That wasn't probably some weird coincidence.
Yeah.
Exactly. I agree with you. That name is almost
so Gideon Wilson is Sam's brother. I don't know if he's also a lawyer in the comics. I'll be honest about that, but
it's an interesting concept. If he was the one who put Blonsky away, which at that time, how did anyone would coherently put that away? Like a legal.
Especially because the implication is that at the time Blonsky couldn't. He was stuck as Abomination. They couldn't make him a person again.
Basically, well, to the best of a realistic thought, what would have happened is essentially he would have been declared some version of not competent for trial for however long it took for him to be able to I guess even go back to his original form and be competent for trial. So that would have taken years realistically, right? So the fact he's been in jail for 2 minutes, he's getting out. But so if it is Sam's brother or not, this guy, he's a lawyer. He has some experience with superhuman law. So is he going to come back in the show more at some point, or was he a one-off cameo there? But that's interesting.
Arguably,
yeah.
If that trial happened in, we're saying somewhere around 2008, 2009, whenever that took place within the MCU, he would have been one of the first people to really have to deal with superhuman law on a large scale. Because before that, everyone was a secret agent or something and didn't really go to trial. I mean, there's the all the stuff with Sokovia Accords, and then the Winter Soldier, like Black Widow, goes on trial, and we see all of that. But this is like that would have been before all of that. So really, Gideon Wilson would have been like the first guy to try to put a supervillain in prison, legally speaking.
And so it's kind of funny if that does turn out to be Sam Sawyer that Sam never mentions. Like, it's kind of a cool fact about his family.
Actually, it's like a really interesting backstory. It seems really relevant that the guy, one of the first lawyers to deal with a supervillain, his brother would end up becoming Captain America. Like, it seems like an interesting connection.
I know, and it's, okay, if he was a lawyer, to be fair, if he put him away, he would have been like a prosecutor, government lawyer. Probably doesn't make a lot of money. But if he was some sort of like hotshot lawyer, right, then you have to wonder like why like Sam and his sister were having like financial problems at the beginning.
Right.
But to be fair, if he's, I mean, prosecutors make a lot more than like public defenders. But yeah, a lot of interesting questions for Sam in 2024. No.
24, 25. We know well, again, I guess if Wong doesn't remember No Way Home, then this isn't 100% certain. But I don't think, have they said exactly where the show takes place in the timeline? I assumed it would have been after No Way Home.
I do think they've interviewed, and it's pretty much just like where we're at. Like most of them are usually like either where we're at or you can put them in the last few area. I assume so. I think it's after everything we've seen, essentially. I don't think there's anything that has
That's
yet
fair.
been.
Sometimes the MCU likes to, like, the writers will be like, yeah, it just takes place now, and then they'll drop it on Disney Plus, and Kevin Feige's like, actually, it takes place before Eternals. Why, don't ask? And you're like, okay, sure.
Stay in this one, and then it was clearly sunny.
Yeah. You're like, all right, that's what you say, boss. Another, well, there's two other kind of like quick. The show does a lot for quick, like, one-liners that are kind of Easter eggs or funny references or pokes at the comics. One that stuck out to me in this is someone throws out a random theory that her powers had something to do with like a mafia hit gone wrong, which I thought was fun because, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, that actually is kind of part of her origin in the comics. So they do reference like how it happened in the comics, which I thought was fun. And then the other one was that there was a rumor she was rejected by the Avengers, which I thought was fun because they haven't really talked about this too much in the MCU, but the comic book Avengers truthfully have like you kind of have to get hired by them in the comics, which is kind of funny. Like they have a whole vetting process, and they'll like interview you, and they have like reserve members, and they have people who did actually like get rejected or people who got offers. Like I've always found that kind of funny. So to hear that concept kind of referenced within the MCU, that someone might have auditioned for the Avengers or like gone in and interviewed or something and then been rejected, I thought that was really hilarious.
No,
And for it to be,
and that quote itself was funny because like as she was like walking in, trying not to talk to anyone, someone just randomly yelled, "Were you ejected by the Avengers?" And then that news lady's like, "She is rumored to be."
Yeah.
Did such a good job with I mean, obviously the little news blurbs, and then that kind of scene where they went through like social media, and there's all these weird dudes saying, "Why they have to give all the hopes to women now," or like weird shit like that. Like they
oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, they know the MCU crap. I don't know a better way to phrase that.
This show is so very aware of like what is happening on the internet.
Well, and I think most, I'm sure, are, but they get to say something about it or like literally incorporate it, and I think that's lovely because it is so relevant in real life. Because like that's all the conversation you hear. Whether this show came out, Miss Marvel, any sort of anything with women, right? So that's all we hear on the outside. So the fact that it's like in there and they're just like, fucking, we don't care. Like that's really nice. I'm glad. I really enjoy that. They essentially call people out without really, like they just lay it out there, and it's clearly absurd. So it's nice. I appreciate that they didn't just try to ignore that like most things. I mean, most things don't get to break the fourth wall.
Yeah.
But I'm glad
to
they take the opportunity.
Yeah, and in the same spirit as that, I really enjoyed the way, like, whenever they would, sort of like what you were just saying, when some random guy's like, "I heard you got rejected by the Avengers," and then she, like, turns it into the headline. I did like the little tickers at the bottom, how, especially towards the end, when Jen, Blonsky's like, you should go in and try to make your own story, right? Or whatever. And she goes on the news, and they're like, "How'd you get the name?" And she's like, "No, some, like, random guy on the news came up with it, and like I think it's just gonna stick." And the way the little ticker at the bottom would twist that into like a clickbaity title almost, where it's just like She-Hulk claims she didn't come up with name, like, and yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was funny how they would rephrase everything she said like it was a headline, and I was like, yeah, no, that's a real thing, because they're trying to like draw people in.
In that segment, and they like put away like when we come back, her exercise and diet.
Yes. She's like, wait, what? I love that. I love that too, because they like the implication there is that the new, like, she's a Hulk. Like no one is going up to the Hulk and being like, "How did you get your physique?" Like everyone is like, "No, it's gamma radiation. This man is literally a superhuman." But with Jen, they're like, "How did you do it?" It's like the same. She's also a Hulk. It's gamma radiation. I don't know what to tell you. Um, yeah. So all of that was really fun. Before we get into the final thing I wanted to talk about, I mean, we gotta talk about the fact that Megan Thee Stallion is in this episode. Yeah. I would have been remiss if I didn't bring it up, which I loved. For me, it was so in the spirit of the show and so fun and funny and goofy, and just like Megan Thee Stallion has such a fun personality to be in something like this. So yeah, I thought it was really great. And as with anything that the MCU or media in general has ever done, there are people who didn't like it, and I don't need to focus on that for too long. But I will say, again, we're talking about movies and TV shows based on the same comic book company that had Spider-Man team up with the cast of Saturday Night Live in the 70s. Like, this is not a new thing, having superheroes meet celebrities from the modern day. And, it is exactly like, I saw some people talk about how if Stan Lee was alive and he saw this episode, he would have been, which is such a dramatic and silly thing to say. Let's get that out of the way. Like, control yourself a little bit. But also, no, he would have loved, like, I think he would have loved it. It would have been, he would have probably wanted to be in the scene, if anything.
I know. Stan Lee did the goofiest shit. There's no way.
Yeah.
She-Hulk show like this, he would not.
He would have had the most fun cameo. Like he would have asked to have a cameo where Megan Thee Stallion was like twerking on him. That would have been what he wanted. And don't never say never say he wouldn't have liked that. Especially when his whole thing, all I keep thinking is with the Marvel Universe was the world outside your window, right? And that's part of it. Like that's why you have the cast of SNL hopping into the comic book, because at the time they were superstars and they were the stars of New York City, and Spider-Man existed in New York City. So it was like the world outside your window, Spider-Man meets the cast of SNL. And like that's what's happening right now. This is a show that takes place in the real world. If there were also superheroes, it's the world outside of our window. And one of these days I might be lucky enough to look out my window and see Megan Thee Stallion. And that's what this show understands.
I mean, I thought it was so funny and brilliant because obviously Megan Thee Stallion, huge star.
Yeah, like one of the most famous people on the planet.
She's like her cameo anywhere it's big. So the fact that they like left it for after that whole case essentially was done with the impersonator, and then she was just there. Like that's hilarious because they didn't like try to force her into the story and like make her like.
No, she was just there.
And then obviously the post-credit scene is a post-credit scene. Like that's fucking hilarious. Like
it is So, and also Tatiana Maslany, again, killing it in general this whole show, but in that scene so specifically when they're she's like, I would die for you, Megan Thee Stallion. The way she delivers that is so perfect. It was so funny.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was good. Yeah, I
uh,
like it. I mean, it's just such a. Someone's like, let's put Megan Thee Stallion in this episode. Like, I don't know who did that, but they did, and it worked.
yeah,
But
well, you know they're in the writers' room and they're like, Runa should be impersonating someone that it's hilarious that Dennis would believe that he could date this person. Like that was the joke they were trying to go for, and someone had to have been like, Megan Thee Stallion, and then they got lucky that it worked. But I do, yeah, that's got to be where it came from.
she, when they were originally in the boss's office talking about Bukowski's case, and he revealed that he thought it was Megan Thee Stallion, and Jin was like, "You thought she drove a facade?" That one gives me a attack.
Everything with Dennis is it's so funny, like consistently.
he's 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 funny.
Oh, while we're talking about that too, I will say another line delivery that specifically has made me laugh out loud every time is when Runa is first like Runa impersonates
she goes out in the
right,
hall.
and then she impersonates Pug, and then she's on the way out. She's just like, "Yeah, like I love harassing women," and leaves. And the way, like when Pug comes out, and he just looks at them, he's like, "You know me."
He's like, I don't.
Yeah, I don't. You know me. Like it was so perfect.
I agree. I feel like his accent or something changed from his he
Yeah,
like last episode when he seemed a bit more southern. I don't know, but it's
yeah.
definitely not that now. But it is great. I don't know what it is, but it is. I do. I also that was one of my favorite.
It was just the desperation in his voice of like, I can't get canceled from this job. Like, like the way, like I don't. It's so good. I loved it so much. Um, man.
Well, that's kind of a fun. I don't know how intentional it was, but in the comics, when she works at GLK&H, they have a shapeshifter on staff who's their service processor. So they're the person that would go like serve people legal documents, and they would do.
Oh, that's shifty.
And so I don't know if that was any kind of reference to that or not, but it made me think of it. Maybe they're not hire. She'll do that.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Um, speaking of comic books, Mary, there's another group of comic book characters who make their MCU debut in this episode. Um, for the first time ever in live action, the Wrecking Crew show up there at the very end, and they are not very threatening. But I will say, dot 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 yet? Question mark. Um, yeah, I've already seen a lot of reactions to them. I think for the scene that they were in, it was fine, and I think there are a lot of hints that they might become closer to the Wrecking Crew we know from the comics. For those who maybe don't know, the Wrecking Crew are that group of guys at the end who still have like Asgardian construction equipment. In the comics, I believe they were just actually construction workers, and I believe Loki used Asgardian magic to make them all big and buff and like enhance their weapons and whatnot.
Yeah, they had like enchanted crowbars, and then they got hit by lightning. I don't
Yeah,
remember who
it was like
enchanted
a weird
them,
mix of
but yeah, it
things,
was
and
weird.
like Loki was their master for a minute. It was like all this big ploy to like get to Thor, and they were Thor villains, and now they've kind of been co-opted as Hulk villains and or villains of any character who's big and strong, because that's kind of their thing, is they're big and strong. um so we see them. They're famously sort of dum-dums as well. Um, but yeah, they are looking normal human sized, but they do have enchanted weapons. They are Asgardian. I do like this concept that because Asgard now exists on Earth, that it's not that weird like the Wrecking Crew wouldn't need an Asgardian to come to Midgard and like enchant them because yeah, they could just go to a construction site in New Asgard and steal the weapons. Like I felt like that was a fun MCU remix on that origin.
I like
Um,
it because they are considered very traditionally Thor villains, so I kind of liked how they still kind of made that a
yeah,
connection that way too. I did, yeah.
yeah. In fact, this is a deep dig, but anyone who watched Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the animated show from the early 2010s that is really good, and you probably should still watch it. It's on Disney Plus. Um, they did like little mini episodes to introduce each character independently before they had like the pilot episode where they all came together. And Thor's episode was very much him fighting the Wrecking Crew, so they were like the first Thor villains introduced in that show too. Um, yeah, that's just to kind of emphasize your point that they are traditionally Thor villains and very much ingrained in Asgardian lore, sort of. Anyway, yeah, so they do keep that in the show, which I really liked. But they aren't big and buff and massive like they are in the comics. They're just normal looking dudes. And there is that really funny moment where they like grab Jen and she's panicking and she's like, "Oh, wait a second," just turns into She-Hulk and kicks their butts, and it's fun. More interestingly, they do attempt to steal her blood uh, for someone who is currently unknown. Which I thought was really interesting because they made a really big deal about Bruce and Jen's blood in the first episode and how like if someone were to get their hands on that, they could make a lot of really big buff people and it would be terrifying. Um, and the Wrecking Crew were just in the end of the episode and they didn't die, they didn't get arrested, nada nada. They kind of just escaped. So I think they'll be back. I think that they might get her blood at some point or something along the lines of DNA, and they might get beefed up a little bit. But I'm mostly curious who you think their boss might be. They typically do work for some kind of boss in the comics because, like I said, they are dum dums and they don't usually come up with their own plans.
I have two things. First one's a little, I mean, Wrecking Crew, but not the box part. But in She-Hulk comics, when she's dealt with them during kind of the more legally, more recent comics, I forget if it was Slot or She-Hulk. But they're in there and they get put in the big house, which is where they get all small. And it's basically like an ant farm of supervillains. I hope that would be, we could get some Ant-Man references like we are
That'd be great.
doing every Disney Plus series at this point. So yeah, let's get that going. And okay, so yeah, they clearly built up this concept of more Hulks can happen or something, from their blood. And we know there's rumors of a World War Hulks movie. We talked about that. There's rumors about the Hulks or Bruce's not secret son, but maybe unknown son who doesn't maybe like. We talk, So I think it's all going to be part of a bigger Hulk type plot, but like Hulks is plural. And I think I would say that this scene made me think, okay, it's setting up a sort of season arc that is rated, where we're going to have our legalness stuff we've had, but there's going to be kind of an end game, if you will, to the season's plot that involves that. I don't know how much that'll set up directly a future party, but it seems like it would, because I think they're making too big of a deal of Hulk blood. We've got Abomination, who's something weird in this show. We've got Hulk in this show. We've got maybe Hulk son at some point. We've got World War Hulk. It's hard to say. The possible horizon. I think that could be where the end of this season might take us in terms of what they're setting up. As far as the actual boss, I think a big theory is that would be great if it's the same guy from the Incredible Hulk 2008. What do they call him this in like the leader?
Yeah. So they never in the comics, Samuel Stern becomes the leader. They never call him the leader in the Incredible Hulk. In fact, they never like he's just the weird scientist guy,
Yeah.
and then they show again Hulk blood getting into a cut on his head in very much the same way that Jen gets her Hulk powers. He gets some sort of power, but the leader's whole thing is that whereas everyone else gets big and beefy, his brain gets big and beefy, and he has a big old head and is green, and we see like the start of his head starting to expand in the Incredible Hulk, and then we have never ever seen him again. There is a now non-canon MCU comic book. I think it was Fury's Big Week. Um, well, it's like sort of canon, but it's I doubt Kevin Feige is like referencing it before he makes a project. Um, that says that like Stern turned into the leader and then was immediately captured by Black Widow and put in a Shield prison, and that's just like where he's been. So that used to be the canon explanation of like why we never saw him again was straight up just we captured him so fast. That was like the OG explanation. But now we don't really have that. So it could be him. I kind of hope it's him. I mean, especially if we're bringing Abomination back, and we're referencing the Incredible Hulk and all this stuff.
You want Betty Ross, so we don't know.
I know. Well, and also to bring it up is that Abomination, like in the original comics and the old Hulk cartoons and all that fun stuff, like he wasn't a mastermind by any means either. So he was also usually working for someone. And within the Hulk mythos, like the guy that big beefy people usually work for is the leader. Because that's like his whole thing, and he's had quite a few arcs in the comics. And actually, to bring back EMH, I'm going to give it another shout out. Like the leader's whole villain arc in that show as well was wanting to turn everybody into gamma monsters, sort of like in his image and that whole thing.
Yeah.
So I could see it happening. I don't know if it's what they'll do. Honestly, if they pulled it off, it'd be really cool because then they would have successfully brought the leader back for the first time since 2008, without it leaking at all, which I feel like a lot of stuff has leaked from this show. So that would surprise me. That's who I hope it is. I don't think that's who it'll be, and I'm not sure who it will be. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Abomination was involved somehow. And even if uh, it turns out to be the leader, I could picture him having also like pulled the strings with Blonsky and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really
I,
sure who it would be
I
though.
that makes some of the most like intuitive sense for someone like let's say who's just watched all the movies yesterday. So you can't literally do that, but like let's say you did
Yeah,
that because we don't know what happened to him after the movie. I mean, very big week, but like you said, it's not necessarily canon. But they clearly set up something there that they at some point wanted to do something with. That's why they left
yeah.
it at cliffhanger.
Someone wants her blood. That's what
Exactly.
we know.
And he obviously in that movie he was the one talking to Bruce, Edward Norton Bruce. He was Mr. Blue, I think.
Yeah, he was Mr. Blue and Bruce was Mr. Green, and that was his whole thing in the Incredible Hulk was that he wanted Bruce's blood because he felt like once he had the Hulk blood, he could like create the most beautiful, perfect monster thing.
Yeah,
Um,
so I mean, thematically makes a ton of sense in that.
yeah,
To your point, lots of things leak. If that hasn't leaked, seems kind of major. And I think if that was the case, that would be very directly setting up a future general Hulky
yeah,
potentially World War. So like I think that would be a very direct setup to it. Maybe that is what they're doing. I don't know if She-Hulk's doing something as aggressively direct for something else or not, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like it, but I mean, Mark Ruffalo was like half the first episode, so like, why not? Why wouldn't I think that? I don't know, but
yeah.
that's like what other guesses would you have? Like what?
I don't. I mean, there's not enough like Hulk villains that I think the MCU would want to put in like She-Hulk, like a show with this tone. I mean, and like this vibe. that just kind of like fit in there. I don't know. And so then I'm trying to think of like existing MCU characters aside from, again, technically the leader does exist in the MCU that might want it, and like I don't know, like
Yeah.
Vale maybe. Like I know Vale sort of is like doing some stuff, and maybe she wants like a hulky person for whatever team she's putting together, and doesn't think it's going to be Jen or Abomination. I don't know. So like maybe Vale because they've been sprinkling her around everywhere. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's not. I mean, at a certain point in time, I might have guessed like Ross, and they were setting up a Red Hulk situation. But I mean, William Hurt has passed away, and I think that Val is sort of the General Ross replacement in the MCU. So I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea.
It's Betty Ross. She has returned and she's the villain.
I mean, she could be Red She-Hulk, because I mean, there is a Red She-Hulk in the comics. It's Betty. But she even has the whole like Red She-Hulk has the a stripe in her hair that's a red color. And MCU Val, did they give her the hair stripe? I don't remember.
I don't think so. No.
I could picture Julia Louis-Dreyfus as like Red She-Hulk though.
Yeah. I don't think they're gonna bring Betty Ross back, but I think it'd be cool.
No, I don't. That's what I'm saying. Is like I guess it.
From 2008 back. Done it a couple of times.
I think Betty's done. I think they're done with Betty. But that's partly what I'm saying is like there were rumors forever ago that they were going to do Red Hulk with Ross, but they can't do that now. If they're not bringing Betty back, they can't make her Red Hulk. What was that?
It'd be a fun twist, though. Also would have leaked, but somehow.
Well, there was rumors like
held a
forever
grudge
ago.
Time, and then now she's like jealous or something of Jen. I don't know. Her dad maybe died in universe too. She's upset. She shows up, gets
There were
the
rumors
it's a whole
like
revenge thing.
when they first announced She-Hulk, and like we started to get a sense that Abomination would be back. I remember there being like, I mean, they ended up getting debunked, but there were leaks, however, whatever the heck you want to say. I don't. Again, they weren't real leaks because they were not from reliable sources. But that like Betty would be back, and then that was years ago, and obviously that didn't. That was in like 2020. Um,
It was so uninteresting to leakers that they just didn't even really need to talk about it because they're like, "What is this?" I think it'd be fun.
um, yeah. So I don't know. I guess that's maybe my best guess outside of um yeah, well, especially because if like the team that Val is putting together is the Thunderbolts, like there is a version of the Thunderbolts that has Red Hulk on it. So maybe, and if Abomination really is reformed, then maybe like the twist is we all think Abomination is going to be like the Hulk character on the Thunderbolts, but then Val actually joins her own team as Red She-Hulk. Like that
Yeah.
could totally be a thing.
So what I'm hearing from you from the beginning of this video, you did not think Thunderbolts were going to be set up in the show, and now you're like B.
There's a three act structure.
Stories that's going to set up the Thunderbolts. So yeah, I think what we've landed on is World War Hulk and or Thunderbolts. So that's our episode 3.
This is not a show that's going to set up anything important except for all of Phase 5.
Secret War. That's already clearly set up.
You threw Ant-Man out there, so that's, Quantumanium.
We've had so many Ant-Man references in so many Disney Plus shows. I'm going to be upset if we don't get one.
I'm honestly convinced it's just because, like, Marvel knows how likable Paul Rudd is, and they're like, we can keep referencing him.
Place to throw in someone likable. It's a perfect place to throw in Paul Rudd. Again.
Paul Rudd would fit in really well with this show.
I know. I'm saying.
And I could definitely see Scott Lang. I mean, he's sort of he has a history as a criminal, so I could see him ending up in another scenario where he's like taken to court and Jen has to represent Scott Lang. Actually, I'd watch the heck out of that episode.
You watch the heck out of it. Yeah, I mean that's a good point about his criminal history. That would be a good in that situation.
There's so much we can do with this show, and I can talk about these theories all night. But is there anything else you want to talk about specifically? Any other comic book references or legal scenarios that you feel like diving into before we call it?
No, I mean legal scenarios aren't always interesting. To
I
go
I mean
around
I think that they are. I feel like Law and
that,
Order lasted as many seasons as it did for a reason.
the judge said something like Thor's inspirational speeches aren't admissible in the
Yeah.
court or whatever. Like I went down a rabbit hole in my own head of like, is that technically true? And it's like depends on what the judge wants. It really depends on the judge. But like, there's so many specific rules of admissibility, so it's kind of like, what's he talking about? So that no, but they need to be standing when they talk to each other. I'm not.
Well, now the thing is that now that you've brought that up, anyone who actually like listens to us again, let us know if you listen. But yeah, anyone who listens to this is now gonna only notice that for like the rest of the show.
I can notice, and I love this show, and I love those scenes. But I'm like, why? Are we doing this? It's just so wrong to me. No, it's like nails on a chalkboard, and it's not because I have this like overwhelming fondness for like respected court. I mean, I should like I worked for a judge, worked in court. I do, but that's not what bothers me. It's just wrong. It's just so wrong. And it looks so weird. Like, what are they doing? Just having a casual chat over some desks? Like, that's just weird. It's okay. I'm done. I'm done.
Okay, so with that, we will adjourn this session of the Universal Court of Truth. Uh, court, as in courtroom, as in lawyers and the law, as in She-Hulk is a lawyer. I have been one half of your host slash law person, Hunter.
I've been the other half slash law person, Mary.
Just as exciting. Thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate it. We're going to keep doing this whether you listen or not. And that's a threat. So, peace out.